Okay, we had closing statements in the Lindsay Clancy case today, and I wanted to go over that a little bit. The jury is still deliberating. Of course, I don't think anybody really expected them to be done with that today. I've heard some people predict that they'll have something by tomorrow afternoon, but you never really know. I think it's kind of a hard thing to ballpark, especially for me, because I'm not used to following a whole trial like this. Hey, Rob, what's up? Um, so I'm going to go through the defense's closing argument here, and if I have time, I will do the other one as well. Hold on. Sorry about that. And then I'll be back at midnight with Omar, the Tilted lawyer. You guys probably know if you've seen my channel before, to go over some of this stuff, and we're going to argue back and forth, like pick a side and argue back and forth amongst each other. So that'll be interesting. He is, of course, a lawyer, so he's going to have the upper hand there, but I'll do my best. Hey, Bruce, what's up? All right. I'm going to speed this up to 1.25 speed. It's both sides, their closing arguments were close to an hour long. So, hey, Jen. Like I said, I'll do both if I can, but if I might just do the defense one now and then wait for Omar at midnight to do the other. So, you guys will have to let me know what you think in the comments as we're going through this. I think at times I thought, sorry about that. At times I thought the defense and the prosecution were both kind of not droning on, but kind of hitting on some things that I didn't think were necessary. And I was like, okay, let's move through this. The prosecution, I felt like there were points in time where I couldn't tell which airport they were trying to land the plane at. However, I do think that they made some good points, and I felt honestly a little persuaded towards a manslaughter verdict if I had to choose one. A little, not like totally sold. You know, I don't feel extreme one way or the other. I feel like this is a very difficult thing to decide. I'm not envious of the jury. I think the jury has seen some very gruesome, deeply important pieces of evidence that the public will never see. And thank God for that, because that is something that should be kept private for that family. It was only played in court. So there's, you know, I don't really know how this is going to go. But we're going to listen to this closing argument here, and we'll comment as we go along. So, give me one sec. SD Johnson, Heather in the library, Amy Jo Trout. Hey, what's up? Thanks for watching, guys. And don't forget to hit the like button for me because it helps me out a lot. All right.
About 5 weeks ago that we met like this, and I indicated to you that thank you for incredible service. That, all of us mean that sincerely. You took literally more than a month out of your lives and sat here attentively. Incredible. Through some of the toughest, most gut-wrenching things that any person can be subjected to. And I think I indicated that, sadly, jurors carried this struggle with them for years. And the service that you have performed, I have never seen before.
So I again would emphasize kind of what he's saying here and what I just said before. They've seen some things that are like deeply gruesome and dark that I think, just based on the descriptions alone and how people in the courtroom said they reacted to things like the 911 call, I don't think like that's the kind of thing that I think probably would have kept me up at night, you know? So I bet there are some jurors who saw that and it absolutely wrecked them. You know, I can't confirm this. Obviously, I wasn't in the courtroom, but I have read tweets from reporters, and I've been following along with people who were there. And apparently one woman on the jury even had a panic attack at one point after listening to that 911 call. So I would say, when considering what you think the jurors might do, just also know that there's stuff we haven't seen and heard that are going to be very, very hard for them to get over. And despite the instructions they are given, some of them might be so affected by those things that they just can't find her not guilty. Some people might feel that way. Now, some other people might say, no, we're going to keep this logical. We're going to take the emotion out of it. And we don't think the prosecution has, shown their burden that she was not in a psychotic episode. So I don't know, but I think that the things we haven't seen are going to be deeply important during these deliberations. So.
You have listened to evidence. You have been fair. You have been objective. You've listened to the judge's instructions, and you've carried them into your heart, consistent with your oath, which is a very, very solemn oath. Passed between government and Lindsay, who has placed herself on her country, which country you are, as a jury of her peers. When you consider what's at stake here in the sense of what we've been dealing with. Cora, Dawson, Callan. She knows loss. And that's why we think of Cora, Dawson, Callan. They are the victims of this case. They are the victims of the horrible, horrific act that has been laid at your feet as jurors to decide whether or not Lindsay is guilty.
Wow, I was muted that whole time, wasn't I? Yeah, I was. Okay, great. No, so I was saying even little things like saying they are the victims. I'm gonna be a lot more short-winded this time, so it's good that you missed the first one. Even saying they are the victims, like on one hand, you could have somebody hear that and say, you know, they feel some sort of they're being swayed because they're hearing that the children are the victims from the defense, when you have a lot of people who are in the internet sphere and online who think that this is so awful because they think people are forgetting about the kids. And they're so focused on Lindsay, they're forgetting about the kids. So acknowledging that the kids are the victims here on one hand could, you know, it could be a positive, but it could also be a negative, because you also hear they are the victims and could be reminded that, you know, these children were the victims of horrible violence at the hands of their mother. So even small things like that can be interpreted differently by different people, and that complicates things. So, okay, I'm going to try not to mute myself again.
As His Honor instructed you, and will instruct you, what that means, that standard of proof that we as citizens in this country are so blessed to have, proof beyond a reasonable doubt before the government charges any citizen with a crime. I don't care how many cops you have in here, how many DAs are sitting here, how many people are sitting in the front row, and they're all going to sit there and be proud of this prosecution. I told you in the opening statement that this... And
I haven't seen the audience today. I was listening to these arguments while I was working, so I haven't actually seen the screen too much. But I know that at least one reporter said on all the other days there was nobody like sitting behind the prosecution there to support the prosecution and advocating for the victims, which I thought was kind of sad. But also, I didn't really see the audience a lot of the days because I just had to listen. So apparently today, a lot of officers and the like showed up. So
this is a prosecution that has ripped the soul out of this girl. This is what they had. This is their family.
It's a photo of the kids and Patrick and Lindsay. You can't see it.
How does...
Brother, you got to stop rubbing that mic.
This.
That's again a picture of
this.
The two older kids. Oh, there's the baby too.
How?
Yeah.
Because of the damn medicine and the lousy medical care that she got. You can troop as many paid experts as you want to come in here and tell the jury Oh, well, she didn't say that she heard voices.
So the photo on the left, which is a little slanted, so you can't really see it, appears to be Lindsay after she was taken to the hospital after all of this. You can't really see her face, but you can see her in a hospital bed here, and there's like all kinds of bandages and equipment.
Voices inside her head. She said she heard voices from outside her head. She said she was making chicken McNuggets. There was a bowl on the sofa. She wasn't making chicken McNuggets. She said something. As I think and I muse and I try real hard to tell you what my opinion is, that this woman was acting in her right mind when these children were killed. So, when you consider the evidence in this case, you consider the person who is in front of you, who is the defendant, as the government refers to her. And as this honorable woman like to tell you, even though a person is a defendant in our system of justice, you don't have to defend against anything. The government has the burden of proof. When the DA decides to charge someone with a crime, he has the burden of proof. His assistants have the burden of proof to prove, number one, that Lindsay is guilty of this offense beyond a reasonable doubt, and then prove, number two, that Lindsay, at the time, killed her children, was not suffering from a mental disease or defect that caused her to have a lack of substantial capacity to appreciate, to know, to realize that what was being done while she was in a psychosis. But we'll laugh about that. It's just another woman. I guess it's just going to make an excuse.
So I don't know if this will land. It totally depends on the jurors. They would laugh at that. It's just another woman, like a crazy woman, or we're going to write that off, basically. But it also might hit, pretty well with some of them, depending on their experience. I did hear that the jury was primarily women. I think somebody told me it was like 9 women and 3 men who were eventually selected for deliberations. And the other alternates included 3 men and 3 women and 3 men. So, that could be a good thing that he's kind of honing in on that.
She's depressed. GAD, general anxiety. Give her a couple of pills, she'll be all right. You know from looking at the objective evidence in this case, this young lady, believe me, I don't have many clients like that. This young lady did nothing wrong in her life. She was a nurse, a daughter, a wife, and a darn good mother. You can see from the objective evidence, you can see, and you'll have all the exhibits for you to look at, and you can see by looking at these photographs, which you will have in the jury room. You can see the Facebook postings. You can see what she indicates about, for example, I just randomly grabbed this one, a son, my prince, that they would have you think she killed him first, cruelly, because she didn't like him. That is repulsive. So she's living real life with Pat, her kids, having a great time that summer. Life is good. She had to go back to work. In an opening statement, I told you, I said, watch the evidence. Watch the manipulation. Because that's what this case was built upon originally and how it developed as the case progressed until it's in front of you.
No, I can't tell you how the jurors feel about this, but the overwhelming sentiment online that I have seen, and that it could be just because our algorithms kind of feed us different things, but the overwhelming sentiment I have observed is that people do not like these prosecutors. So when he's sitting there calling them manipulators and saying they're not telling the truth, that could hurt. That could hurt them, right? Because if they really like him as the defense attorney and they're just like really not liking these prosecutors because they've been all over the map, they've been rude to witnesses who have suffered through trauma, the loss of their grandchildren, etc. They've tried to bring religion into it. There's all kinds of reasons people have criticized the prosecutors, in addition to just generally not bringing a good case forward, being kind of all over the place with their theory in the beginning and now in their closing, a kind of an almost very different theory. So when he's talking about the prosecution being manipulative, I think that might be pretty persuasive when it comes to considering things like the prosecutors saying, no, Patrick testified that the bands were not in a knot, versus the defense saying, yes, they were in a knot. So likability could play a big factor there.
And how does that happen? Well, in the very beginning, going all the way back to one of the first 911 calls you had to suffer through was made. You could hear in the voice, Pat Clancy, the horror, what he had obviously experienced. You can see from the evidence that's before you the injuries that she suffered. You will have in the jury room the exhibits that indicated the extent of the injuries from, I don't have to go through all of them, the extent of the injuries to slitting her throat, to slashing her wrists, throwing herself out a window, blood all over the bedroom floor, window open, screen slashed. Oh no, the screen wasn't slashed, my bad. That's what she thought. It's called a delusion. She was in a psychosis when she thought, that probably right here, sitting here, believes that she slashed the screen. She didn't. Subjective evidence.
So nobody's recollection of that night or even that day is going to be really perfect. This was a extremely traumatic event that happened three and a half years ago. 3.5, yeah. Oh, sorry, I forgot to put hung jury on the poll. I'll redo it. So what was I even saying before I saw the comment about the poll? I got this. Hold on. ADHD is kicking in. No, nobody's memory of that night is going to be perfect, right? Because it was extremely traumatic. And I see people kind of taking, Patrick misremembering something or giving an account that conflicts with another account, or, Lindsay, her version of events being different than something that the prosecutors or one of the witnesses might say, and taking that as somebody's doing something nefarious. And I think that's not true. I think that people want a clean narrative. They want this to be like an episode of Criminal Minds, right? They want it to be like everything makes sense and lines up perfectly into the place, and there's no gaps or messy misinterpretations or like messy different recollections of things. And that's just not real life. So a lot of people who aren't used to watching this stuff or hearing about it or reading about it versus like what they see on TV, it's like they're going to be dissatisfied with the lack of a clean narrative, and a lot of times kind of distort that into it meaning somebody's doing something wrong when that's not necessarily truthful, like not on purpose anyways, right? So you kind of have to make up your own mind on that, though. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, right? I'm just here to tell you what I think. If you disagree, that's fine. Just make sure you try to do it politely. If you don't, I will insult you back, but I won't tell you that you can't think that way. So.
And why did we spend almost a week showing you the extent and the severity of that suicide attempt? The reason that we had to do that is because they were arguing that it was a fake suicide. Dinky little cuts, no bleeding. She didn't mean to kill herself. She's going to throw herself out the window, I guess, and slide down the house. Remember that one hanging off of the...
So I know I'm stopping a lot here to comment a lot, and I'll try to give you guys longer stretches without me pausing and commenting, but I do want to say this is something that has really irritated me since the beginning of this case, and especially with the prosecution, this whole notion that this was a fake suicide attempt, and the way that people are downplaying it, and the way that people even, have their kind of conspiracies about somebody else doing this to her. I think that it totally minimizes the severity of this woman's struggle, and the fact that she very much did try to take her life in a way that almost killed her, but didn't, because she got taken to the hospital for intervention. So people say like, you know how to cut yourself if you're a nurse. They don't understand like hesitation marks, how your body fights against you cutting yourself. It's not quite as simple as hearing about someone else doing it or seeing somebody else's wounds or, reading about it on a page. It's a very hard thing to hurt yourself. Your body fights you. And then to go out a second story window, people will say, is not fatal. Like she knows that's not fatal. Okay. You don't go head first out of a second story window onto frozen ground without thinking, yeah, I might die here. So, that has been really irritating for me to see people kind of twist and distort that into like trying to make it into a whodunit or trying to say that it wasn't real. It was real. Whether you think that she is criminally responsible for killing her children or not, I really want us to stop pretending that what this woman did was not with the intention of ending her life, because it very much was, in my opinion. So,
window, sliding down the house, and Lindsay screwed up, and she hurt herself bad. You know that's not what happened. You know that she made, the testimony of Dr. Velkovich, that she made a very, very significant suicide effort, slashing her wrist, slitting her throat. And isn't it interesting when you consider objective evidence? Googling slitting a throat, Googling suicide, Googling drugs, Googling side effects, Googling ketamine treatments, Googling all of these drugs, Googling the effects of Tufts medications, lorazepam, sertraline, hydroxyzine, lorazepam, buspirone, trazodone, fluoxetine, zolpidem, myrtazine, clonazepam, quetiapine, diazepam, quetiapine. It goes on and on and on and on and on. You have the chat, you have the descriptions to see. And obviously, she wasn't consuming all of these at the same time, because one thing this kid did was try to do what she was supposed to do. She took the drugs as she was told to take them. She was religious in her obligations to take care of her health. She went to Dr. Tufts when she was a young lady living in a house with her husband and her babies, respected nurse, wife, friend, mother. Should have kept drinking, huh? That was a big deal, wasn't it? Remember that? We're just going to assassinate this young lady in every which way we can. Remember that evidence? Oh. I was concerned. She was drinking 5 drinks a day. She was worried about, you heard the evidence up to 2019. What are they talking about? She wasn't drinking while she had her kids. She wasn't drinking while she's breastfeeding. She would have a couple of beers with her friends. That's bad. Put that over in the bad pile. Right here. We spent all that time showing through Dr. Lapasada's testimony that this was a legitimate, dreadful, horrific suicide attempt. You think about this beautiful young girl throwing herself out a window. That's a quarter. I don't know if you have to play pool. I challenge you to tell this jury why we spent a week showing that she committed, as your witnesses.
Counsel, address the jury, please.
Said, they're witnesses. Serious suicide attempt. Remember that? She tried to kill herself. So now they'll back off on that, and they'll agree. A serious suicide attempt. That's why I say, watch the evidence. Watch the manipulation. Remember the argument with the bands. She took the bands out of the bag, put the gloves on, talks to Dr. Lapasada on the Zoom, slams the bands down out of the paper bag, does the movement of the bands and yells at Lapasada and says, wrapped. They were just wrapped. They weren't knotted because you gotta get Lindsay tightening the band, right?
So this is kind of one of the things where I was saying likability and your kind of impression of the attorney is going to matter a lot. The prosecution, they were very dramatic with that, yes. And they have totally different versions of the event here, because if the prosecution is, as they're saying, the bands were not knotted, then that paints a picture of Lindsay being a little more deliberate and intentional in that she's holding the bands down, which is, and I know this graphic and disturbing to think about, but it is something that they have to consider, versus tying the knot to where she didn't have to sit there and hold it like that, which is equally disturbing to me, to be honest. I mean, that I don't think that makes it any better what happened, but I think that it will ultimately play a factor in whether or not they think that she was calculated and intentional. So we'll see.
You got to hold it. You got to hold it for a minute. You got to hold it for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. That's why she needed the bands not knotted. And then she said, it's like this. and they sprang open. Remember that? Dr. Laposada said, yeah, I saw what you did. And she walked away like if the glove won't fit moment. Quarter number two.
OJ reference.
What did Patrick Clancy testify to? You heard his testimony. He indicated clearly, unequivocally, they were knotted around the necks of those children to the point where he had to struggle. And it's your memory, not mine. If I say something you don't recall, forget it. It's what you remember the evidence to be. But clearly, I would suggest, he struggled to get it off of Dawson's over his head. And the police officer saw through the window. It's horrific stuff. But it's objective. And it shows the manipulation.
And I just want to point out here, because I've seen a lot of comments about the paramedics just seeing Patrick sitting on the couch and not doing anything. So there were multiple paramedics, of course, and then some of them were outside with Lindsay, and then Patrick starts screaming in the basement. So some of the paramedics come down to the basement before some of the others. So yeah, somebody might testify, I saw Patrick just sitting on the couch, right? But others saw him trying to help the children, take the bands off, or even resuscitate them. And I think that the differing accounts confuses some people to where they were like, he was just sitting there, sitting around, not doing anything. That wasn't true. So like, as he says here, a police officer saw what was going on through the window. So yeah.
Manipulation. This government, this prosecution is a mess. They would take their evidence and argue to you that she did not tie a knot and walk away because, as Dr. Laposada said, you're talking about 4 or 5 seconds till somebody passes out. No, they're going to have the 4 minutes. And that's not what the evidence shows, is it? So, as we move on, Lindsay's in the hospital. And this whole thing about conversations, and she's talking to people, and the kids are in the basement, her throat was crushed. You heard the...
So here's one thing that I didn't like. Ultimately, I don't think it will hurt them too much. Her throat was not crushed. That was never testified to, right? She had an injury to her thyroid. Her thyroid was pretty fucked up. And that your thyroid also impacts your core body temperature, which played into a little bit how the doctor described why her body temperature dropped so low so fast. But her throat wasn't crushed. Like your thyroid, it's also not your voice box, right? So that isn't true. However, like I said, I don't think it will hurt them too much because the point he's trying to make is that she could not communicate. And by most accounts, the people who heard the 911 call mostly would agree, except for 1 or 2, right, who heard it. And I've heard from Sue O'Connell, as well as there was another male reporter who did a transcript. Most would agree that she was just grunting and trying to communicate, but was not talking. So I think ultimately what he's trying to say here, she couldn't talk. I think that's probably true, right? I think that's credible. And I think that they really need to attack that because the prosecution's experts based a lot of their opinions off of collateral information from Patrick. And if they kind of sow doubt in Patrick's version of events, say like his recollection is incorrect or something he said is not right, then they can kind of call into question the ultimate conclusions of those experts who say that she was faking a psychotic episode. So it is smart to attack Patrick's version of events at some of these points, right? But not too much, because they don't want to go so far as to discredit him when he suggests that Lindsay was always a good mother, a very involved parent, always interacting with the kids, always doing everything she could, trying to help herself. Like, you don't want to totally wreck the guy, but you do want to put a little bit of doubt as to his recollection of events that night, which I maintain it is reasonable that people who went through something this traumatic, both Lindsay and Patrick, to have some, distortions in their memory or, gaps in their memory. This is not to say that Patrick did it. At no point during this closing argument is he suggesting that Patrick did it, but they do need to challenge his version of events as far as what happened when she was lying on the ground, So you're going to hear them call a couple things into question as far as like the police investigation as well. So we'll get there in a minute.
911 team. You draw the inference whether or not there's a conversation about where the children are. tried to kill myself, the kids were in the basement, all that. You determined whether or not that was something that could be discerned. And the police investigation, because as His Honor indicates.
J-Tor 393 says, I feel like a reasonable person would understand there would be inconsistencies in their memory. And I totally agree. And I think people are going so hard at some of these family members. It's really cruel sometimes, and it's awful. And I hate seeing it, which is why I got so frustrated with people, a couple weeks ago when I was watching all this. I was like, I can't believe people are being so awful to people who went through a heinous thing. But like, the thing is, a lot of people aren't acting reasonably. And that kind of goes back to what I said about wanting a clean narrative and wanting everything to make perfect sense. Otherwise, there's like this intense skepticism because people don't trust law enforcement. People don't trust the government, right? And especially in this particular area where, Karen Reed happened either in this county or nearby. And I didn't watch the Karen Reed trial, right? But I know about it. Like, everybody's heard about that, right? So in my opinion, a reasonable person would understand that there's inconsistencies in memory due to trauma. However, I think that we apply some, not you, right? But we as a whole apply that understanding selectively when we have a bias. So for example, people saying Lindsay might have a false memory or she doesn't remember something and they think that somebody told her something to fill in a gap. They give her that kind of consideration, but then they don't give that to Patrick. They don't say, oh, this was really traumatic. He doesn't remember this perfectly, like, right? And vice versa. People who really are wanting Lindsay to go to prison, they think she's scum because there are people who think that. They think that Patrick can do no wrong here and that Lindsay is like this horrible, evil shrew who is lying about everything. And so they apply their consideration to Patrick's side, but not to Lindsay's. And I think that is contributing to a lot of the sort of aggressive discourse you see online. It's that principle of applying our, care and consideration and our empathy selectively to one side versus the other to try to make things easier to either understand or kind of explain, or just to try to stomach it. You know what I mean? So hopefully that makes sense.
There are two things here. Number one, proof beyond a reasonable doubt that she's guilty. And number two, proof beyond a reasonable doubt that she was not suffering from a disease or defect, as His Honor instructed you at the time of these killings. Those are the two things they have to prove. And when the police charge somebody with a criminal offense, they have an obligation to investigate. At the end of the day, when you're talking about, well, we've got the charges are before the court, you can sit there in the court, you can feel proud of yourself. Did you do a good investigation? You even know what this. You'll see the photograph of the cup and the powder. What is it? They don't even analyze it. Did they take pictures? Did they analyze? Did they test the blood? Lousy investigation of this. Well, that's okay because she was guilty. And they put her in the hospital. And she's the evil woman that killed the 3 innocent kids. And they're going to stand there while she's chained to the bed, paralyzed. You heard testimony from Dr. Zeisel. They weren't little fluffy cuffs that were securing her to the bed. They were handcuffs, not the medical treatment. Medical treatment would be, like restraints, so you don't do whatever, pull lines up.
So a lot of times when we have somebody who's aggressive or who has done something, violent, they're acting up, they seem agitated, we have to put them in something called soft restraints at the hospital, which is like, it's like this thing that kind of wraps around your wrist and the sides attached to your bed, and they put it in all 4 of your limbs, and they're called soft restraints. Right? But handcuffs are a different story. You only use handcuffs if somebody is, on hold to go to jail, or they've committed a crime and they came in with the police or something like that. Like, they might bring them in handcuffs, but if they haven't committed a crime or they're not suspected of committing a crime, they take the handcuffs off. But in this case, she came to the hospital and they eventually, not too long after, had an arrest warrant for her, which a lot of people think the investigation ends with an arrest. It doesn't. Otherwise, we would never investigate crimes where somebody is arrested at the scene, and that doesn't make sense, does it? So they did handcuff her. Yeah. And that is extremely unpleasant. And I imagine, it would feel awful to sit there like that. But, it is normal protocol to do that. So
we're talking about when the big men were in there with their guns and their badges and they're sitting outside the door, and they're going to make sure that Lindsay Clancy, paralyzed, chained to the bed, doesn't get up and run away from the hospital, I guess, And they just have to suffer their way through. Well, I guess I worked 8 hours. I had another shift. I had to work that night. This is the treatment. And what's important about that is what kind of treatment did this young lady get from the healthcare providers? Remember Meg Collins? She came in this court. Meg, you might remember. Tall woman, short blonde hair, squared away.
Let's get this about Meg.
Unbelievable. She was not
as a nurse
of what nursing is all about. Not having attitude, not treating somebody like they're to be disdained. And what's even worse, she comes out of a coma. She is intubated. She has had major surgery of her broken, crushed spine, vertebrae, rib, thyroid. Massive, not my words, medical records, massive testimony, blood transfusion for the blood loss. And when someone, you've heard evidence, comes out of surgery.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, you listen to him describe all this, and even though he got the crushed throat thing wrong, right, there still was a serious injury to the thyroid and her spine, among other things. So, like, that was a very fatal attempt, right? It could have been a very fatal attempt had they not gotten her EMS when they got there. Like, she very well could have died had she been out there alone for too long. So I just think that people trying to downplay that, like, oh, she just went out a second-story window, that's not a big deal. It's a huge deal. That is a very big deal. Don't do that, right? Don't do that. And I worry sometimes because I see people on TikTok, like, hanging out their windows and shit, trying to recreate the scenario to support their theories that she was attacked rather than did this to herself. And I'm like, I worry that people are taking this a little far. Please stop hanging out your windows. You know what I mean? Like, this was a very serious suicide attempt.
Yeah, delusional. You've had anesthesia. You've had think about having a tooth pulled. Think about the trauma that somebody has when they're in a hospital bed laying there, paralyzed, unable to feel the lower half of their body, but able to feel with the meds and the pain medication and everything else, the damage to the spine. And then the hospital has a meeting. Remember the other doctor, I think it was Dr. Shah, the Indian woman? Wicked impressive. She was amazing. She had the facts. She was able to tell you exactly what she observed. She was able to tell you what they were doing to treat Lindsay. So
that's what I also like to remind people when people online are starting to question, like, the core temperature, like, it couldn't possibly have gotten down that low, or other things about, you know, the medical situation she was in. Her ER doctors, even by the defense's, you know, standard, were excellent, and they, you know, would have had to report a serious, you know, issue with the story they were told, like an impossible body temperature. They would have had to communicate that to law enforcement, right? And that was never brought up because they did have a doctor here who explained why her body temperature got that low. And I know it's when you hear people say, I'm a doctor, I'm a nurse, whatever, online, you want to take their word at face value because they do have experience. But if you're not the person treating the patient, the best you can do is describe what could happen in this scenario. You cannot tell anybody what did happen because you will never have all the information. And that goes for me too. So, like, when I tell you guys about different mental health issues and outcomes, when I talk about different symptoms, I can tell you the types of things that you might see in these situations, that might happen in these situations. I cannot tell you what did happen. So just keep that in mind when you see this stuff online, because nobody in a comment section or a TikTok video can tell you 100% what happened, ever. Unless they were the treating, you know, provider for that patient, and they should not be talking about it online. That's a HIPAA violation. So let's move on. She treated her like a human being. She was a damn good doctor. Came in here and told you all of her observations about her, and told you one of the things that ultimately that they were concerned about is they had to have this big confabulation about, we're going to take her off the healthcare process. They had to have lawyers. They had to have people there. They had to have her signing documents. They had to determine whether or not she was going to be signing something to have her parents take over because Pat was not going to be responsible for her care. Lawyers, cops, handcuffs. Do I need a lawyer? Write that down. So that was the explanation for why she was asking for a lawyer so soon after regaining consciousness. And people have taken that to mean she knew that she was, like a cold-blooded murderer and she needed a lawyer. She knew that she was probably going to go to prison. But as they describe it, she asked for an attorney because she needed a healthcare proxy. Patrick was not going to be the one making decisions for her. She wanted to change it to her parents, I believe. I heard at one point. But to be fair, if somebody killed a member of my family, I don't think that I would be their healthcare proxy either, even if I loved them. I think that I could not have anything to do with them. So I actually think that this asking for the lawyer, this explanation for it makes sense to me. I don't think that that's anything that makes me too, it doesn't sway me one way or the other, because I think this is a plausible explanation to the point where I haven't heard anything directly to refute it that I feel is big enough to make me think she was definitely asking for a lawyer because she knew that she was totally guilty. You know what I mean? So
Where are you? You're out there somewhere. Write that down. Boy, she wanted a lawyer. That's a bad thing. Must be guilty. Let's put that in the guilty pile. That's why she said that in a delirious state, dealing with all of these people about that issue.
quarters.
But what's even more nefarious is you think about it, as I said, your eye on the ball because of the manipulation. Paul Zeisel, big deal. I'm friends with the guy. You heard evidence that I called him. I was with Pat a night or two after this incident in the bedroom with all the blood. I was with Pat taking evidence that the police didn't even see in their thorough investigation. And I was able, as you know now, certainly, to grab this. Why wouldn't the police have grabbed this? They're all empty. You can see when they were prescribed. You can see what they are. You can see what she took. You heard the testimony. It's tough to take a handful of pills. Remember the guy saying that yesterday? Tough to take a handful of pills. Well, no, they were crushed. Oh, shit, they were crushed. Okay. Where's the residue? Where's the crusher? Where's anything? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Great investigation, guys. So you have a situation where they leave this behind. They don't even look at it. One of them, and again, your memory number, one of them testifies, well, they might have looked at it and saw it and just didn't seize it. Seriously?
So here's where, the challenging the investigation comes in, right? So when the prosecution is using all this stuff to talk about like evidence from the investigation to support their version of events, when he attacks the investigation and calls it shoddy and terrible, horrific, or whatever it was he said yesterday, it again, undermines the basis for which the prosecution and the experts are forming their opinions that she was faking it. So that's a smart thing to do. This defense attorney should be putting that forward. They should be challenging the investigation. Now, does that mean that he thinks she didn't do it? Absolutely not, in my opinion. But the smart thing to do is to attack that. The smart thing to do is to attack Patrick's memory. The smart thing to do is pretty much anything that will make the jury doubt experts like Dr. Greg, Dr. Sadoff, right? I call him Dr. Greg, who is very smart and had a very good layperson explanation of how you could possibly tell if somebody was faking hallucinations and why he doesn't think that her version of events as far as the hallucinations makes sense. But if you can challenge the basis on which Dr. Sadoff, what he evaluated and how he formed his opinion by just totally undermining the investigation and the collateral information from Patrick that he was getting, then you can really sow doubt into a jury that's very hard to overcome. So I think that was extremely smart. I do not think it means this is a whodunit. I haven't heard any attorneys that I normally watch, who I listen to, talk about this case, who thinks that's the case here. I really do think this is just a defense attorney doing an excellent job attacking every possible thing he can attack. And I think that for the most part, I'm finding this very effective. There are a couple points here where I'm kind of I don't know if we needed to quite bother with that too much, but we'll keep going and listening, and I'll let you know if anything that comes up.
They go down to the kitchen, they seized every pill bottle that was in the cabinet, along with the books. And speaking of books, one of the things that they found, smoking gun. Good moms have scary thoughts. Hallelujah. Put that in the guilty pile. We're going to put this in a plastic bag. We're going to show it.
So that book, Good Moms Have Scary Thoughts, trying to use that as something that paints someone as having bad intentions or being like evil or something, or having bad thoughts and like in a premeditated way. That's not convincing to me, because that's a published book. So obviously, plenty of moms have this book. I don't really see a whole slew of moms who possess this book who are committing murder. So I just don't find that to be. I don't find that to be a credible argument for, anything against Lindsay. I think the book thing was a stupid thing to harp on. Him bringing it up here is this makes sense, that he's just saying like, no, the nurse told her to get this. Like the nurse suggested this to a mother who was struggling. Like that's not weird. That's normal. Having a book like that to help you. So
go to a jury so they know that this young lady had scary thoughts. Turns out that your lawyer gave it to her. So you have this evidence. You have evidence of sleep aids. You have evidence in the bag, because obviously this stuff was just thrown in there. It wasn't in a bag when I saw it inside this thing here, and we seized it, and we held it for 3.5 years. Anybody care about it? No. You had evidence that the police knew that I had it. They could have it, they could look at it, they could analyze it, do whatever they wanted. They didn't have to. This here, you heard evidence. This is a little wish jar that they bought on their honeymoon in Hawaii many years prior to even having kids. And when you look inside it, you see that there's all sorts of little folded up pieces of paper. Some of them are dated, some of them aren't. They go all the way back to 2017, 2018, 20. And they reference her wishes to have healthy kids, her wishes for her kids to be successful, her wishes to have a good birth. Second time around, hoping for a good birth, worrying about the child with I forget where they rubbed the thing. This woman lived.
You see those things in front of Lindsay's hands? People were asking, are those pills? They were Altoids. Just in case you guys didn't know that, because people were asking about it. I saw in chat when I was, listening to this live. These are Altoids, cinnamon Altoids, he said in an interview with press afterwards. I don't know why they were laid out like that, but those are not medication. Those are just mints, just so you know.
For her kids, until she had the pleasure running into Dr. Tufts of her 2 months experience. And after she ran into Dr. Tufts, it was not a wonderful life anymore. And what did Dr. Tufts do? And everybody laughs at me. I said the television. Okay, I know it's a telemedical thing on your telephone or on a Zoom. Take more pills. You have the medical records. You heard the testimony. You know her concerns. You know her fears. Does this seem like a young lady that didn't care and wanted to score more drugs off somebody? That's another repulsive allegation. I think the evidence is pretty clear. There's no basis for that at all. She was scared. September.
So when it comes to trying to score more drugs, I know that the prosecution has, kind of put forth this narrative for doctor shopping and only wanting to get certain kinds of medication and saying she was only consistent on the benzos. That with the non-compliance with certain medications and the only taking the benzodiazepines consistently, I think that's not good, right? For your health overall, especially when you're being prescribed medications that you need to take for a few weeks, a lot of times, for them to set in. However, it turns out that if she is bipolar, as a lot of these people have now said, some of those medications were actually going to cause a very adverse reaction no matter what. But at the time, it did seem like a little bit of a red flag to me that she was only taking the benzos consistently. However, that doesn't really speak to whether or not she was in a state of mind to conform her conduct the night she killed her children. So I think I get distracted by a lot of these kind of arguments about the lead up to that night. And so I sit here and I overanalyze what I think about her, not taking her medications consistently or not, following up with the treatment program that the Women's Center, referred her to. And I get really caught up in that to the point where I forget that the only thing that ultimately matters is her state of mind that night. So this whole buildup and what she did to try to get help and where she failed in following up for the prosecution, that's all, to speak to her credibility and her effort to prevent herself, per the defense, prevent herself from, doing something like this. But ultimately, whether or not she is guilty of a crime or not criminally responsible rests on that one night. So I feel like a lot of that is more of it's not a total distraction, but it is distracting from the most important thing sometimes, I think. I don't know. You guys let me know what you think about that.
Into October of 22, young, vibrant, hardworking, you've heard all this, not my words, witnesses' words, holding goals for herself. Hardworking nurse, hardworking mother, would take the kids to the Kingsbury Club. That's another thing. Sounds pretty snooty, doesn't it? Oh, they're at the Kingsbury Club. It's a swimming pool and a place where you can exercise.
I wouldn't really
watch the manipulation.
As a member of the jury, I wouldn't have cared too much about the Kingsbury Club.
Kingsbury Club, you got manipulation with these other items here, and you've also got manipulation.
Like, nothing about this trial is funny, but when he says stuff like, it's a swimming pool, or he says the thing about the television with the telehealth, like, I do chuckle a little bit because I'm like, dude. But, like, just to be clear, none of this subject matter is funny at all. This is actually a horrifying, emotional case, which I felt drained from listening to it all day the first, couple of weeks. But there are moments here or there where, like, even the judge this morning, he's like, turned to the jury, he's like, if you think me standing at this podium means I'm about to talk to you for a long time, you're right. So, like, you'll get, like, little moments of levity in there, but ultimately, like, I don't want anybody to think I'm laughing at any of this. It's just his choice of words and his tone sometimes that I think is funny. Like when he said the thing about the van down by the river, or I don't want to meet up, to the expert. I just want to know where you were staying. So I just want to be clear about that. I don't want anyone to think I'm being insensitive to the horrible tragedy that happened here. So just to be clear. It's a swimming pool.
Paul Zeisel told Lindsay what to say. Say that you're hearing voices. Think about how ugly that is. Because beyond a reasonable doubt, even though we don't have any proof, we have no burden. You heard from Sheila. Remember Sheila? The woman that's the reverend or whatever.
Sheila was the chaplain
at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. She didn't know Lindsay.
Guys, I'm going to grab my laptop charger to plug in real quick, so I'll be off the screen for 1 second.
And she told you that she continued. She was there when Lindsay came out of, was extubated. She was there when Lindsay was going through her treatments. She was there for 8 days before Paul Zeisel even knew Lindsay existed. But they would be in here telling you that Lindsay saw the psychologist because the lawyer went and got the psychologist to go and speak to her. And then you have these guys here, the cops. They're having meetings, talking about it. They're talking about it. Must have been the shrink. Must have been the psychologist. Must have been Zeisel. He's the guy that told her what to say, and he did not. How can you ruin a man's reputation with the career that he has had and still has, thankfully, to put him in a position where he tells a broken young woman who is vilified by our society for killing her 3 children, that he goes in the hospital and tells her to say?
So, hold on, let him finish that statement, and then I'll tell you my thought.
She heard voices. Disgusting.
So, and again, when he's like very he's very good at his presentation. He just, like, even the way he just says some things like disgusting, you can really feel it, So this thing about Dr. Zeisel and this insinuation that he told her to say that she was hearing voices, I don't find any credibility to that at all. I don't think that I have no reason to believe that Dr. Zeisel did something like that. However, to my recollection, I don't think the prosecution actually outright brought that up. I was listening to Peter earlier, the lawyer, and he was saying the defense was trying to kind of get out ahead of some stuff, and that, they thought the prosecution was going to suggest that. And I don't think they ever actually said that. And I believe the prosecutor in her closing argument addresses that and says, we never said that. But I will just say either way, I don't believe that to be the case. Now, Dr. Zeisel, I don't know the nature of the patient-client relationship beyond what we've heard in his testimony. I will say one thing bothered me about Dr. Zeisel, and that was the reference to the hugging. Look, I don't think it's a good idea for a provider, a doctor, to have physical contact with a patient in that way. I don't think it's appropriate. I'm not saying that he was doing anything beyond that, to be very clear. I'm not saying that at all. However, I just think that is kind of it opens a door to, kind of push the boundary a little bit. And I don't like that. I thought he was a really smart doctor. I thought, other than that one thing, I thought, I didn't have any problem with his testimony. I just thought that was a little odd to me. I didn't love that. But I don't have any reason to believe that he went in there and told her to say she was having hallucinations. You know what I mean? So just let me know what you guys think about that.
So now you know that she told Sheila first that she heard voices. Command hallucinations. She didn't say command hallucinations. I heard voices. It was a male voice. Told me. You had these other guys that came in. The government's rebuttal witnesses. Very, very impressive. Very, very impressive. The first two, Mac, put him aside. You've got the other doctor as well. So Mac is why he was freaked out when I asked him where he stayed. And the other guy looked at me like his eyes were bugging. Why did I ask where he stayed? Whatever. Point is, they don't see.
I mean, I don't even know what to make of that. I would say last night when I was talking to Omar at the beginning of our stream, towards the beginning of our stream, I said, I think bringing Dr. Mack was a mistake. I think Dr. Sadhoff was a far superior witness as a psychiatrist. I think having both of them, especially when they had different opinions, when they couldn't quite, none of their experts really had the same opinion, right? They all differed. I think that they would have done better with just Dr. Sadhoff and then Dr. Kirk, who his last name starts with an H. I can't remember what it was. And I call these guys Dr. Kirk and Dr. Greg because it's easier to pronounce and it's easier to remember. So, but you know what I'm talking about. The psychologist and then the second psychiatrist is who I thought they should have had on there. I think Dr. Mack, they could have done without Dr. Mack, I think.
See her for years. And why? The other guy, Halburn, I think it was Halburn, he had to wait until maybe it was the last name, I forget. They had to process his payment from the DA's office through the school. Who cares? If you have an obligation to try and be objective, to try and even look as though you're competent and objective, why would you wait for so long? Why would you go with another guy? Why would you take this young lady and have her in a room and question her one right after the other? Wouldn't you like to sit there and be questioned by Dr. Mack? Boy, that'd be an experience for 3 hours, 4 hours. And the other guy is going to pepper his questions at her as well between that period. The next day, she can take tests and then go back at it again.
So as far as the testing and examinations and all that, I don't think that's unusual at all. I don't think that's unusual. And I want to say, as far as the waiting until, very close to this trial versus 3 years ago when this happened, I don't know how things usually go when they were trying to work out a payment with one of them. So he put it off. The doctor put it off until the payment was secured with the school or whoever it was that was handling that. And I don't know if that's really, I don't know if that's a thing I would count against them because I think people, maybe his university, or if it was Dr. Greg, maybe his university wouldn't approve him to go do that until they got the payment. I don't know. Or, people just don't work without getting paid sometimes. You know what I mean? So I don't know if that's really weird or not. I would agree that interviewing her sooner would have been better. But I don't know that I count their waiting due to the payment issue against them. All of these experts are paid. You've heard both sides kind of harp on that. Oh, that's your friend, or you're friendly with Dr. Zeisel when they talked about the defense witness, or, oh, the prosecution's paying you. How much are you getting paid for this? All these experts get paid. And I'll say the same thing that I always say when watching any trial like this, especially when it comes to mental health. You can find an expert to testify to your side. You can always find an expert to testify to your side. It's about whose expert is more convincing, and they are all making money. So yes, you can pay someone to basically say something that's going to help your case. You're always going to be able to find someone to do that. So I actually don't always put 100% stock in expert testimony. I use it as a guiding factor, but I don't think that I would listen to what an expert says and 100% believe it, because I know that they're all incentivized. So I'll just say that.
Again, with Mac and with Halvern. And she was cooperative. She was pleasant. She was friendly. She answered the questions, and she owned what she did. She never ran from anything. She's gone through evaluation after evaluation after evaluation, recorded. You'll have the video to look at as they're questioning her, as she's sitting there in her wheelchair, hour after hour after hour, 3 years after this incident, but that's okay. You're busy. Paul Zeisel was there, literally, in Brigham and Women's, because I called him. Because I was asked to represent this young lady, who heard evidence. I saw her in the hospital. I saw her laying in the bed broken. I saw her laying in the bed practically dead. I reached out to Dr. Zeisel, and I asked him, please, can you talk to this woman? Concerned as he testified.
Somebody says Dr. Medchill, worst expert ever. And that is exactly what I've been talking about, because Dr. Medchill, if you don't know, testified in this case where a woman lied about a man impregnating her and tried to sue him for paternity over the fake babies. Her name is Laura Owens. They found an expert, Dr. Medchill, who had never seen her before, never been her doctor, to be an expert to testify to the fact that she was totally pregnant without them ever having sex. I mean, come on, man. That's what I'm saying. You can find an expert. You can pay an expert. You're always going to be able to find one. Almost, always. It doesn't necessarily like that. I will never give that 100% weight. No matter how smart, how accomplished they are, I will never give that 100% weight. Because that was just dumb. An expert getting up there saying a woman can get pregnant from a blowjob. Like, come on, man.
Her mental well-being. What kind of demons, what kind of horror was in her mind as she lay there paralyzed and hurting and medicated, swollen, tubes, cops, chains. He went and talked to her. Big deal. I asked him to go. You judge the credibility of a person. Did Paul Zeisel have the ring of truth when he told you that he's there out of humane feeling to try to help this young lady? And he's been by her side for 3.5 years. Same thing with Sheila. Why would Sheila, for all this time, visit with Lindsay as she testified at the Tewksbury Hospital? She's not getting paid. She's not a hired gun. She's not somebody that's coming in to say something.
And Sheila, again, is was the chaplain, right? I think it's chaplain. Is that the correct word? You guys have to let me know if that's right. But she testified here on behalf of Lindsay, and this was around when people were saying insisting that Lindsay doesn't remember what happened. She was told that she did it. She was told about everything that happened, but that's not true, because she has repeatedly given her accounts of what happened to doctors, lawyers, the chaplain, her family. Like, there's a lot of people she has given her recollection to without ever being coached into thinking that she did it. Now, again, I'll go back to her memory is not going to be perfect. And you have to remind yourself also that, like he said, she was, delusional per their account. So thinking that she cut the screen or whatever when she didn't. Having an imperfect recollection of events is not indicative of a false confession per se. Now, you might have a detail wrong, right? You might have a distorted idea of what happened, like slashing the window, but it doesn't mean you don't remember doing it. It doesn't mean everything that you say is wrong. It doesn't mean that anyone else planted it in your head. She has, for 3.5 years, told her story repeatedly in her own words, from her own recollection. Believe her. She says she did it. She did it. So that's all I really have to say about that. I know a lot of people disagree, but I'm going to be honest with you about what I think. And I think that suggesting that somebody else set her up is, it's irresponsible, and it takes away from the important conversation that should be happening around this case. So that's just my thought, man. I don't know.
Something at my request. She loves Lindsay. He's a good kid. He's a beautiful soul. So you have Zizel that has been with her all that time. You've got Sheila who's been with her all that time. You've got evidence that her mom and dad who live in Connecticut come up and they stay and they visit with her and that they sit with her. And God forbid they actually sometimes had dinner. Remember that? They get the Tewksbury records. Boy, there's a good score. Let's go through the Tewksbury records and see what she's doing on the anniversary of the deaths. How about on their birthdays? Can you see them sitting there going through the medical records? Okay, doctor, what did she do then? She propelled herself down the hallway, met with her parents, laughed, had dinner, watched TV, talked on the telephone. God forbid. She's not curled up in the fetal position, wailing, self-flagellating constantly. For 3.5 years, she's acting like a human being trying to exist.
So this goes back to when the prosecution was saying, based on the notes, the records from the hospital staff, Lindsay was not seen as distraught or sobbing or outwardly grieving on the anniversaries of the children's deaths or their birthdays, important dates like that. And I think that is effective in making some people think that she is not remorseful or, that she's cold. I think it's effective because I see so many people hanging on to that online to just talk about what a monster she is. And I see so many people ripping apart Patrick, his eulogy for his children 1 year after. I see them ripping apart his interviews where he talks about his kids. I mean, he seems like an awkward guy, I'll be honest. Like the way that he talks in front of cameras and the way he was on the stand, he seems like he's kind of an awkward guy. That's just my snap judgment. But the way these people are being ripped apart based upon next to nothing, right? It's I think it's kind of awful, especially when it comes to the family. People, the way they talked about her mother and his mother, awful. And people forget that you can be just a totally different person than somebody else and have a totally different reaction while having the exact same feelings, the exact same trauma almost. Totally different reactions. Some people just aren't good at having emotions in front of others. Some people aren't good at giving speeches about the intimate parts of their life or the special memories that they have of people they've lost in front of others. This doesn't mean much because for all I know, she went into a room and cried after all that, after her parents left, right? And I'll tell you this, as somebody who's worked on multiple psychiatric units, at one time I was working for 3 different facilities. These notes that you get from an overworked and understaffed unit, they are not thorough. Like, you do what you can, you do everything that you have to do. They're not thorough. They're not always telling you everything that happened with the patient during that shift, because most of these people are just trying to survive and keep the people on the unit safe. They're trying to keep the patients safe. They're trying to make sure the patients take their medications when they're supposed to. They're trying to make sure they get fed, they eat. They have to check on them every 15 minutes, usually, as every unit I've been on, they have to check on them 15 minutes as part of a precaution. So I can't say for certain whether or not she grieved her children on those dates, because all I know is that they read the notes of some hospital staff who usually are so spread thin, because God knows nurses are underappreciated and underpaid most of the time, that they can't fully staff a unit when they really need to, which is dangerous. I've heard about the kind of bare bones notes from the staff who are just trying to keep their heads above water and take care of a bunch of other people at the same time. So personally, I won't be judging based on those notes. However, a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about how a psych unit works and what all is done and documented. And so the jury, some of them might hear that and think, wow, she's disgusting. She doesn't care at all. There are going to be some people who think that. It's all going to come down to, like, these people all have different, it's going to depend on experience. Like, maybe someone, while they're deliberating, is sitting there and explaining, no, you don't understand. Like, this doesn't necessarily mean she wasn't upset. It's just like, this is what they observed at that time. So it depends. It depends on who you have in the room, right? So, but I do think ultimately, I don't put too much stock in other people's emotions or lack thereof in front of me regarding their own personal trauma and grief. I think that that is a mistake. I think that we misread people constantly when we try to do that with strangers. So I don't put too much into that. So just my 2 cents.
But they go through the records and they want to get those dates and use them against her manipulation. And then you consider we're 3 weeks away from a trial. The guy yesterday that's looking up to the heavens while he's testifying, Caesar, tells you that he wanted to establish a rapport. Can you imagine? You know that you're 3 weeks away from your murder trial, and you know that this is doctor number 3 who's been hired by the government to come in and evaluate you and testify against you, and he's going to establish a rapport. There is no rapport, but yet she was cooperative, she was friendly. Interestingly enough, just like the treating doctors don't talk to each other, they don't communicate with each other, they don't have access to medical records. She signs the HIPAA forms. They don't know what her records are, but they know for sure what Dr. Resnick had in his report. They know for sure what Dr. Zeisel had in his report. They know for sure what Meg Spinelli had in her report, and they incorporate that into their report. But then you have the MMPI and the other psychological tests that were administered to her on the second day of the Mac Heilbrunn team interviewing, interrogating, questioning her. She passes the MMPI. Testimony is presented. She answered the MMPI honestly. And they're pertaining to state of mind. They're pertaining to questions about what occurred. They're questioning this young lady as to what her state of mind was then, in the middle, and now. And she didn't lie. She didn't malinga. She didn't exaggerate, and more importantly, if anything, she minimizes. But she certainly was off the chart on the suicide scale. And then you have testimony from Dr. Resnick, Dr. Zeisel, Dr. Carney, and they were paid for their testimony. We're all paid, like I said, not the jury so much, but the judge, myself, Chrissy, everybody gets paid. These doctors came in and testified. Phil Resnick, the man is something out of a scary movie. He has the world record of investigating, examining, and treating people in psychosis that kill their children, filicide. He has a world-renowned record for checking fakers to see if a person is malingering. Their doctor agreed that his article on Voices is a leading article with research in the world. Their doctor agreed that he, Bill Resnick, is an expert on malingering. You heard him testify by Zoom because he had surgery. But he showed up by Zoom and testified that, again, 4 months after this incident, he met with Lindsay, he evaluated Lindsay, compared, looked at all the records, just like all the rest of them. Everyone says they looked at all the records, the police reports, grand jury minutes, everything else. He indicates clearly, in his opinion, that she was in a state of psychosis at the time of this death, times 3. Has any of the government doctors rebutted that? One of them, Heilbrunn, said it's possible either way. That's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The other one, Mac, you can accept his testimony if you wish, but
I don't think Mr. Reddington and Dr. Mack are going to be going out to lunch anytime soon. Let's put it that way. Not a fan of each other. Dr. Kirk, the psychologist, the second one who testified, the second expert on rebuttal, he did say some things that I felt I liked, that he was sort of sympathetic to her situation, but also explaining why that might not necessarily mean that she was not criminally responsible. But he did say some things on the cross where he did get caught in a situation where it kind of supported some of what the defense was saying. And I would argue the same for Dr. Gregg a little bit, though I think that they both did make good points as far as why somebody saying they have hallucinations, in certain contexts might not add up. For example, that automatically following the commands of a voice that you have suddenly heard here for 18 minutes and then never hear again is a little bit suspicious to some people, right? And it's just going to depend on who the jury finds credible there. So we only got like 12 or 13 more minutes of this, so we will finish this up.
Suggest that you probably won't. And then you're left with the doctor yesterday, who didn't even know. She didn't even know what killing during the course of the psychosis was. And when I was questioning him about it, he agreed. And I said, don't just agree with me. You're just agreeing with me because I said that. And he basically said, yeah, what kind of expert testimony is this? It's a mess. But the government uses them to try to rebut a man like Phil Resnick, who tells you that she was suffering from a horrific mental disease and defect at the time of the killing of her beautiful children. Why? The how? And the fact that under the law, as His Honor has given you, she's not criminally responsible. And the burden is on them right here. Prove to you that at the time of the killing, as Dr. Resnick says, that she was suffering from a disease or defect. As Dr. Zeisel said, that she was suffering from a disease or defect. As Dr. Condi said, she was suffering from a disease or defect. And Condi took you down the road of all of these medications as a psychopharmacologist, as a doctor that specializes in prescription medications. And you got the evidence. So you're able to look at that and determine, see what the side effects are, what she was complaining of, and look at her records. I mean,
I saw this comment. She booked a few days in her calendar to fly to Montreal to testify. Her appearance was canceled and they sent a $25K check. Anyway, what a life. Wait, who are we talking about here? Oh, you're talking about a doctor you knew. I thought you were talking about the woman who ultimately didn't testify for the defense. So there was a woman who was supposed to testify who apparently had been sharing things about the support rally for Lindsay. I don't know if rally is the right word, but you know what I mean. The gathering for Lindsay outside the courthouse on Facebook, which some people speculated that might be a bad look, I guess. And then I think Reddington, when asked about it, because I've been following, like I said, a bunch of reporters who have been there, said that the Facebook thing had nothing to do with it. But I don't know why she didn't testify. So if anybody has any more insight into that, if you heard something I didn't, let me know in the comments. But as far as I'm aware, they deny that that was an issue as far as her testifying. All I know is she didn't testify. So, but I saw your comment and I thought you were talking about the lady for a second. So sorry about that.
they have really turned her inside out. I mean, they've got every single text, every single email, every single picture, everything that she did in college. Oh, that's another thing. She lied. According to the guy yesterday, that's what she lied to Pat about being on Prozac. They were dating for 3 months. She's living in Boston. She meets this kid. She thinks that she might like him, and they're dating. Oh, excuse me, before you go out with me, let me tell you that about a year ago when I was studying for my exams, because I'm nervous about talking in public, I got on Prozac. Seriously.
So I think that argument that her not telling him about the Prozac was a little silly. I mean, at the time, at least, not mentioning it later on when she's having all these issues. And if he's asking questions about like what kind of medication she's been on or has she tried anything before, then not disclosing it is a little, I don't love that. But as he's describing it here to the jury, they're hearing that the prosecution is saying that her not disclosing to a guy she was just newly dating about her Prozac is like somehow an indication of wrongdoing. I don't agree with that. I think that's kind of goofy. I think it's a goofy point to make. Like I said, if you're later on talking about what kind of medications you've tried and haven't, or what kind of treatment you've done in the past because you're with your spouse or your long-term partner and you are having some problems, that's a different situation. Not disclosing that would seem a little more intentional to me. However, starting to go out with a guy and just not telling the dude, hey, just letting you know I'm on Prozac. Yeah, that's not a thing that I would do either. Frankly, I don't disclose my medication list to people. Actually, yeah, I do. I'm kind of an oversharer, which is probably why these streams take so long. But this isn't about me, so nonetheless.
That's what the government is arguing in this case. You're going to have this journal, which talks about her being, this is how controlling she was, manipulation. In the opening statement, you may recall that the district attorney said that she was a hard, charging, manipulating woman that was controlling, and everything in their life was controlled, and she ran it to the water, to the carrots, to the beets. You look in this book, And as you might recall, Ms. Rossi testified when asked, did you feel that she was being controlling of you? Because she says, for example, Monday, 10:24, Callan, put down for a nap. Hopefully we'll nap for 2 hours. If he wakes shortly, let him resettle himself. Bottle when he wakes up. Then it goes on and on. Make salad, romaine lettuce. He likes peppers, broccoli. Cut the sweet potatoes in chunks. Thank you, with the heart. Another good score. You look at her journals that she took. You'll see, as you go along, and the dates that she's recording in these journals.
She's very meticulous in her recording her thoughts and the things that were going on throughout her day and in her life. So yeah, I would say I don't know a lot of people who are that meticulous in like handwriting anymore. So that's kind of interesting, but you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that it actually might have helped them in the long run. So I see some people, and I'm seeing some people throughout the stream say they thought the prosecutors had a better statement than Reddington because his was kind of all over the place. I've seen other people say the prosecutors were all over the place. And I'll tell you what, like, I don't know how these people stand up there and remember everything they want to talk about for 50 to 60 minutes without just totally spacing out. If you've ever sat through one of my streams before, you know that I could not do that. Okay. So like, listen, this was a 50-minute speech. We're on an hour 21 right now because I keep stopping and talking. So like, I don't know how these people do it. How do you stay on track in an organized way for those 52 minutes? I think you have to just kind of remember your main points, the main things you're trying to hit, and you have to kind of work around that. I don't know how people could just memorize a 50-minute speech. You guys let me know what you think. Some people may be better at that than others, but for me personally, I can get the gist of what I want to talk about out, but I take some journeys to get to my points. And I think if you've been sitting here for the last hour and a half, you probably agree with that statement. But, you know, I try my best for you guys, so don't hold it against me. But my point is, I don't think I think there was a little bit of disorganization from both sides, but I think that I certainly could have done better. Let's put it that way.
She's talking about the drugs that she was prescribed. And look at the first page. Look at how detailed. Dates, how she felt, 10 milligrams Prozac, and it goes on like that, goes on through November into December. December 9th, 10th, 11th. Horrible intrusive thoughts. Horrible thoughts in the AM. Horrible thoughts. Horrible thoughts. No motivation. And then finally, horrible thoughts, no motivation, deeply depressed. Then that's around the time she went to Women and Infants Hospital, right? Looking for help. Look at this. As she runs into January, there's nothing other than little chicken scratches because her mind was gone. In January, as she's on these drugs and she's suffering from what you've heard is postpartum depression that can lead to postpartum psychosis, and you have these men coming in here that don't even know psychosis from schizophrenia as experts, telling you that if a woman doesn't have these symptoms, like it's a disease, symptoms of postpartum depression within 4 weeks, that's it. Lights out. You're not a person that can be considered. You're not a real person for purposes of postpartum depression and or postpartum psychosis.
Let me roll that back just a few
I
seconds.
suggested he's wrong. I said, that's it.
I want to hear that one more time.
Men coming in here that don't even know psychosis from schizophrenia as experts, telling you that if a woman doesn't have these symptoms, like it's a disease, symptoms of postpartum depression within 4 weeks, that's it. Lights out. You're not a person that can be considered. You're not a real person for purposes of postpartum depression.
So I will say, I think that's kind of, that standard is bullshit. I mean, that standard is bullshit. I really do think it's awful. I think that it needs to be revised. Of course, he, talks not just in this closing, but in this trial in general about what trash he thinks the DSM is. DSM has problems. I don't agree with the way they classify some things. For example, I don't agree that Asperger's and autism should have been merged into autism spectrum disorder. I think that was a mistake. I think that classifying having postpartum symptoms as being within a month or even 2 months, I think that's a mistake. I think that there are problems with our classification and how we diagnose. However, those things aren't on trial. The DSM is not on trial. Lindsay Clancy is on trial. So And eventually her doctors will be on trial because she has a civil lawsuit against them. But the DSM, and this is bringing attention to the DSM and the problems with it. However, if I'm the jury, I'm probably not going to care much about the DSM being flawed when I'm just trying to determine whether or not this woman could have stopped herself when she killed her kids, you know, if she's criminally responsible. So that's the thing that important to, you know, be aware of and to talk about and to course correct within our mental health system. However, it doesn't have much to do with this other than, you know, she wasn't, I mean, I just don't think it has much to do with the immediate time period within which she killed her children. You know what I mean? So important overall, yes. Important for diagnosing and treating mental health, yes. However, does not speak to culpability as to whether or not she could have prevented herself from acting on a command voice or if she heard a voice at all. So, you know. Because whether or not you're getting correct treatment, like you can be getting medications that you're having an adverse effect, that doesn't necessarily mean you cannot conform your conduct if you're having psychotic symptoms, right? So there's just a lot more to it than that.
And or postpartum psychosis. Well, I suggest that he's wrong. I suggest the second guy's wrong and the third guy. Well, actually, I didn't even know. It's your memory. If the gentleman, Mac, even knew, I think he said 4 weeks. It can go up to a year or longer. But we don't really know because you heard the evidence. There's no evidence. There's nothing in the DSM, but that's the Bible. God forbid you should go to Europe. You should look at the World Health Organization records. You should look at the way they treat pregnant women that have problems with their children. No, we're the most advanced country in the world. But we still have doctors that come into court on a murder trial and talk about 4-week cutoff on something that they don't even know exists. They've never treated it. They've never written about it. You have terrorism experts. You have an expert that comes in and talks about his focus and his interests, and it's about juveniles and drugs. And like I said, kids that like to drink and smoke weed. Those are the experts, quote unquote, to support their burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Lindsay was not suffering from a disease or defect at the time she killed her children.
As far as qualifications to treat and diagnose and evaluate like postpartum patients, I feel like the defense had the far better experts. Like the prosecution's experts, it's not that they have no experience with psychosis, right? But they're trying to move the conversation to a specific postpartum psychosis. So like you could be a doctor who knows everything about psychosis back and forth, but if the defense is really hammering in this point that it was a very unique type of postpartum issue that was going on, then that might discredit in the eyes of the jury, you know, the prosecution's experts. Oh, hang on one sec. Cheesehead lost on Bourbon Street. Thank you for the 30 joules. I appreciate that, man. And all diagnosed her with something different, correct. The prosecution's experts were not on the same page. I found, like I said, Dr. Mack, I was not a huge fan. I think Dr. Greg, Dr. Sadoff, he was probably the one that I found most credible. Dr. Kirk, I don't have, I'm kind of on the fence, right? So I think Dr. Kirk and Dr. Greg, very good doctors, but did they serve the specific scope of this case when they're trying to make it about postpartum psychosis, postpartum depression? I don't know. You're going to have to, you're going to find out what the jury thinks about that, I guess. So being confused and not sure if she was psychotic, does that equal reasonable doubt? Well, if they're not sure, I would think that is reasonable doubt because the prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she was not psychotic. And if they're like, I'm not really sure, the prosecution hasn't done enough to make me feel confident that she was not psychotic, then that is, beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think in that case, you would find her guilty or not guilty in the way that she's not criminally responsible, even though she did commit the killings. So, yeah. All right, we're almost done here, guys. Don't I won't ramble on too much if I can help it.
You all remember this. October. This is not an evidence, it's micro-identifications, too big. So, but basically it shows clearly and unequivocally the depths of despair that this young kid was in, trying to raise 3 kids, trying to be a wife, ready to go back to work. Did anyone say that she was just lazy or just didn't want to go back to work? Manipulation. They're arguing. She didn't want to go back to work. She didn't want to go back to work because she didn't want to leave her kids, especially Callan, because she loved her children. They were her life. Manipulation. And when you consider the journals, I don't know, you ever watched the movie there, The Shining, with Jack Nicholson? Remember the scene when he's sitting there in a state of complete psychosis?
So we got OJ and The Shining in this closing statement.
He's writing a book and he's typing, and the wife finds the book and opens it up and looks at it and says, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Repeated after repeated after repeated. And he says, do you like it? You look at the records of her Googling drugs. You look at how many times, how many hours of the night in the afternoon she's.
So I want to ask you guys, how do you feel about this Shining reference? I'm not sure I'm crazy about it. I don't think I'm crazy about that one. The really quick OJ, if the glove doesn't fit moment that he said earlier, I think that one was kind of, quippy and it fit. But the Shining reference, I'm not sure if I want to be compared to Jack Nicholson's character. You know what I mean? So, you guys have to tell me what you think about that.
He's looking this stuff up in between taking care of the family, in between all of the stuff that was going on with visiting doctors, seeing doctors, going to Rhode Island, being told, no, we can't help you, calling a suicide hotline, we can't help you, calling another suicide hotline, we can't help you. My God, what does she have to do? She was reaching out for help, and she was not getting it. She turns herself in to McLean Hospital. You saw the doctor, nice one. She's testifying. She didn't know. I suggest to you that she didn't know hardly anything, let alone psychosis involving a young lady like her going through what she was going through.
So, and here's something that's been a point that's been really contentious just among online observers. This idea that she was begging for help and did everything she possibly could, there's nothing else that she could have done. Some people disagree. Some people will say she had all the help in the world compared to most other people. Some people will say, she had everything she needed. So I think personally, there's a middle ground. And I always tell people, even if you are somebody who comes from a place of having more resources and more access than somebody else, doesn't mean you can't have a debilitating disease or illness, because that shit does not discriminate. So just because somebody has money or more access to care than somebody else doesn't mean they can't be just as sick and have just as much of a treatment-resistant condition as anyone else. So that alone, as far as her privilege goes, that doesn't mean anything to me. Because you could be the richest person in the world and you could be sicker than anyone else. Your mental health does not give a shit, for the most part, about how much money you make. If you don't make money, you maybe have some more stressors that lead to depression and anxiety and such. But you know what I mean. When it comes to psychotic illness, it doesn't matter how much money you make and how many doctors you see. If you don't get the right medication, if you're not following up with everything you're supposed to follow up on, you're not gonna have a better outcome. So, you would see, I think, in places of poverty and poor resources, you might see more poor outcomes because those people don't have access. But the having access and having money itself does not cure your problems. So I don't think we should harp on that as much. And the prosecution, in their closing statement, they did that. So they spent a little tangent on Lindsay had all this stuff. She had XYZ. And I don't think that does it for me. Yes, she had a lot of resources. Yes, she had the means and the access, but it doesn't mean she couldn't be extremely mentally ill. So why I say I think there's a middle ground is I respectfully disagree that she did everything possible. I think she was a woman with agency, and most of the time she was functional. She was able to take care of her children. She lived a day-to-day routine at home. I think that she did have, a lot of people around her and was able to, maintain contact and maintain relationships. I think that she was struggling a lot. especially with the depression. I've seen, or I either heard or read something from Patrick where he described her as like sobbing on the couch in the middle of the day. So I don't want to downplay that she was struggling. She was. And I don't want to downplay that she did go seek help. However, did she do absolutely everything that she was supposed to do? No. And I'll tell you why. In addition to not kind of sticking with the medications that were prescribed, which I'll give people that those medications may have given her adverse reactions, so therefore she shouldn't take them, right? In addition to that, she also did not continue with talk therapy. And people say, when you're depressed, you don't want to do talk therapy. Of course not. But if you're in such a condition that your experience and abilities as a parent, as a person are suffering, you have to do it. You have to keep going to talk therapy. You have to keep up with whatever resources you're given. So when you call the suicide hotline and they kind of say, we can't really do much for you, but they give you resources to follow up with, and you don't follow up with those resources, that is a little bit of a problem, right? And my biggest kind of gripe with this, she did absolutely everything and there's nothing else she could have done thing, is I thought when the Women's Center turned her away, they just kind of kicked her to the curb and said, see ya. And I was like, that is repulsive. I can't believe they did that. I can't believe they didn't at least find her another program she could go to. What I didn't realize is that they recommended her 3 or 4 other programs. One of them was inpatient. And she said, not right now. I'm going to follow up with my doctor on this. She goes to follow up with her doctor and then doesn't mention those programs at all. So she doesn't ask the doctor, should we consider these programs? What do you think is going to be the best for me? She just kind of blew it off. And I understand when you're deeply depressed, it is extremely difficult to do these things for yourself. But to say that the option wasn't there is a little bit misleading. So I would say overall, my position on this is very middle ground, to where I'm like, I think she was struggling a lot. I think she did a lot to try to help herself. However, I think there were some more steps that could have been taken. Does that mean that she could not have been in a psychosis that was so debilitating that she couldn't have conformed her conduct? Does it mean that she has to be criminally responsible based on the events of that night? No, it doesn't. But I do have a gripe with these extremes. I think we live in a kind of a bubble of extremes when you follow these things on the internet, where it's like people say, she had all the help in the world, she didn't do shit. And then you have other people who say, she did everything, she was begging for help constantly, there was nothing else she could have done. I think most situations are a little nuanced. And I know a lot of people find that offensive for me to suggest that she did not do everything she could have, because I'm just trying to be honest with you and what I think and what I've seen in a lot of patients, to where a lot of times the hardest things to do, like continuing to go to talk therapy or going to one of the programs you've been recommended to after you were already rejected from somewhere else, that's painful. It's hard, especially when you're depressed, you're hopeless, you don't feel anything, or you feel sad all the time. It's like you really don't want to do those things, but sometimes the hardest things to do are the most important, especially when you're declining. And so I think I fall somewhere on the fence as far as her treatment and efforts. I don't think that she should burn in hell and that she's terrible, and that she definitely didn't try, and that she totally killed her kids on purpose. I don't think that. I also don't think that she is an angel who, I don't think it's impossible that she is criminally responsible. So I see a lot of either condemnation and rage or hero worship, and I feel like there should be a little bit of nuance, So that's just kind of my thoughts. We're almost done with this statement, guys. So
the government bears the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. They bring, for example, Ian Whiffen, the guy, you might remember him, was the guy that's, I guess he developed or helped develop Celebrate. What you get when you look at the records, You don't measure on an Apple Watch. Well, I shouldn't say Apple Watch because we know that they didn't have the Apple Watch, but on a cell phone. You don't measure going down the stairs. You measure stair climbing, right? That's what the testimony was. And there were 3 stairs that were climbed. Okay. The last record is 5:38. At 5:38 p.m., we went through that on cross. What happens to the phone? Don't know. It was on the bed. Was it dropped on the bed and left there for 20 minutes? She could have been anywhere in the house during all that period of time, right? You've got a compressed period of time that Patrick leaves to go to the restaurant to pick up the CV, and you heard the guy yesterday say, and then she sent him off to go to CVS. It's on the way. It's on the way. She didn't want him out of the house long. She was in distress. She wanted him home to help with the baby, to help with the kids, to help putting them to bed. How long is he going to be gone? She Googles it. Is that something that is so nefarious? You think that goes right along the line with the book about good mothers having bad thoughts. My God, she actually Googled the time frame that Patrick would take to go to 3B and pick up the food and then leave and stop at CVS on the way. So I guess the government is suggesting she's not in a psychosis. So she's Googling Miralax because the doctor earlier that day told her that the baby Cora needed Miralax. Why would she do that? Because remember the government's opening when they told you she wasn't suffering from a psychosis. She was a woman that didn't want to live her life anymore, wasn't happy being a mother, didn't want to live that life. So she's going to kill her kids and hopefully throw herself out the window and not paralyze herself, and then she could run off into the sunset, I guess. That's what.
So I think that being the prosecution's kind of opening argument and angle, I think that was incredibly stupid. I think that was a terrible argument to try to make, especially given their own experts are way more sympathetic. When Reddington read part of the prosecution's opening angle to their expert, and he said, I don't agree with that. I think that minimizes what she was going through. That's terrible. So the prosecution, the way they kind of went in guns blazing like that, just attack. She's a terrible person. She's a horrible person. And instead of sympathizing a little more and maybe, considering that, she might have been, trying to get help and she may have been suffering a lot, but suggesting that doesn't necessarily mean that it was okay for her to do what she did, because it seems on this day, at the time this happened, she was making conscious decisions. That would be one thing. And they kind of tried to pivot to that. They pivoted to that in their closing argument, which I won't go over tonight. I'm just going to go over the rest of the defenses. But that was, just the way they went in gung-ho like that. It was such a miss based on the testimony that came after it. I was just like, man, they were messy. They were messy with this. And I feel like they've kind of brought up different theories and angles of the case throughout. And man, the way they presented this case, I feel like made it more of an uphill battle than it already was. And I think that ultimately I can't see her being convicted of murder 1 or 2. Like I said earlier in the stream, I think we see a not criminally responsible or we see a manslaughter. That's my thought. Because they were so messy. I don't understand assigning these 2 prosecutors to this case. I think the way they treated some of the witnesses was made them downright unlikable at times. But what he's describing here, the way they laid out this case in the beginning, like they just kind of they gave him a clear runway to like kind of drive them into the ground. It's just kind of crazy. So. Lindsay 2159, did they charge manslaughter? Yes, the judge gave them the instruction that they can consider manslaughter. So
what their theory was, along with the fact it wasn't a real good suicide, it was fake. Well, now we know, don't we? The mess that this young lady was in her brain, my brain is being damaged. I will never be better. That's the evidence. That's the evidence that we have in this case. Burden of proof is on them to prove to you that at the time that she killed these 3 beautiful kids, that she just wanted to move on with her life. And I suggest to you, just as there's no chicken nugget residue, and then when you look at those photographs, there's a slice of a cucumber, there's a slice of a carrot, there's no chicken nuggets in that bowl. Patrick wouldn't know what the kids were eating. She was the one that would cook their dinner.
So the chicken McNugget thing, I think, is a little overplayed by both sides. I do think it's funny when he says chicken McNuggets. Because they're just chicken nuggets. Why do I think that's funny? I just do. Okay. But there were multiple bowls apparently, so the prosecution will argue like that was just one of the bowls, and then he's arguing there were no chicken nuggets in that bowl. I'm like, guys, land the plane. Can we get off the chicken nuggets? There are no chicken nuggets on board this plane. Can we please land the plane? So like there's some stupid little stuff like that where I'm like, hey guys, let's stick it to the really important points here and not get distracted with this were there chicken nuggets in which bowl thing. So I don't know. They both did that though. Both sides did that, which I felt was a little silly.
He was in the refrigerator, but the guy yesterday is like, oh no, Patrick said that the child was eating the chicken McNuggets in the bowl. No, she was getting food out for the two kids, not the little baby, two kids for dinner. There's no evidence that she's lying. There's no evidence that she's malingering. And finally, you remember there was a big deal about whether or not the voices are within the head or whether or not they're outside of the head. Dr. Resnick's article with the largest research on voices malingering in the world indicates that 38% of almost 1,000 people that were examined report voices from inside their head.
So let me just pull up this comment right here because I think this is something I meant to talk about. I'm not buying that explanation of why she used maps to determine the distance of the restaurant. So the defense maintains that Lindsay looked that up because she was worried. She didn't want to be alone. She didn't want Patrick to be gone too long. She wanted to make sure it wouldn't take him too long. The prosecution points out that, they had been there multiple times. So she kind of knew where the restaurant was, that she didn't really have to worry about that. They also argue that why didn't she, she just have her husband cook dinner or get delivery. And I think that is actually, to me, it's a good point. The not getting delivery is a good point because you can even through like CVS, not CVS, Uber Eats, DoorDash. I'm sure there's other ones that you can use. It just depends on where you live. You can get even medicine you can get from the pharmacy. Like I've had, when I've been sick, I've had people bring Dayquil, from the pharmacy, and they scan your ID and everything if you need to with whatever medication you get. And so whatever medication he was getting, it sounds like it was over the counter. So why didn't we just, if you were so afraid to be alone, why didn't we just use a delivery app there, right? So that does it makes me question things a little bit. Is it a full-blown smoking gun? No. But it's questionable. And I know I was listening to a lawyer earlier, and he was saying, well, some people just really aren't DoorDash people. And to that, I would say, if you are a mother of 3 children and you have been having these thoughts and you are terrified of being alone so much to the point you're trying to look up how long your husband's going to be gone, you better start being a DoorDash person. I don't think I would risk that. And I think some jurors may see it that way. And some of them may think they find the defense more credible. So to me, that is odd. To me, that explanation is odd. I don't like it. Like I said, it's not a smoking gun, but it is certainly something that made me question things. I don't know that it's necessarily something that overcomes reasonable doubt. I can't say that. So I guess you gotta have to weigh that as you will.
And it stops. You're going to buy that guy yesterday? He doesn't know what he's talking about. This young lady is not guilty of the killing of her children because she was suffering from a disease and defect, as His Honor instructed you. And they're not going to be able to prove otherwise. And it's their burden, not ours. Thank you.
All right, Como.
All right, so that was the end of their closing. I see some people saying like they map things out like this too, and they like to know where people are. My own personal kind of speculation there, where my brain goes, as far as some of the comments that I'm seeing. If that were the case, then I, as her defense attorney, would probably try to show that she always maps out these routes like that. And since they didn't do that, I have to assume that this is an anomaly. I would say, like I mentioned earlier, I've heard some people who have been watching this say, maybe they weren't DoorDash people. And again, I would just harp on, like, if you were in that dire of a situation, I think you better change your mind. I think you do what you have to do to make sure everybody's safe. To make sure, if you're that scared of yourself and being alone to where you have to track how long your husband's going to be out of the house, which is what they said. They said that she didn't want to be alone and that's why she did it. I think you better start being a DoorDash person, just for that night at least, so you can get some help. But that's just me. Other people are going to have different opinions. Other people are going to have different insights. So, it just depends on what the jury thinks about that. So it is 10:35 here, and I'm going to be on with Omar, the Tilted Lawyer, at midnight. So in an hour and a half. Here is a link to that stream, which is going to start, like I said, in an hour and a half. If you want to, it's going to redirect you over there as well when I end this stream. Thank you for watching this with me. What I'm going to do, since I rambled for so long, and this took, like 2 hours almost, is the jury is going to be deliberating still tomorrow. I think I'm going to, during the day, go through the prosecutions like this and talk about it with you guys if you want to join. If you want to know when that's going on, here's where you can look. Hang on. I always try to announce my plans here on my YouTube channel in the post tab. So if you go click on my profile, my YouTube channel, and you go here to posts, you guys can see that. You can see here where I show like what I'm planning on doing and what time. Hang on, let me refresh this real quick. Yeah, so like tonight I announced this here. And I put like some of my other stuff here when I plan it. Anyways, I posted the link in the chat to the next stream that's starting in an hour and a half. If you want to join us, I would love that. If it's too late for you, then that, makes me bummed. Okay. But I will go over the prosecutor statements with you guys, just not tonight. Omar and I are actually going to go over some of these closing statements, probably not the whole thing. But what he's going to do is try to argue for the defense. And what I'm going to do is try to argue some points for the prosecutor side. And we're going to see kind of who can make a good case there. So maybe that's interesting to you. Maybe it's not. If it's not, don't tell me that. That's mean. Okay. But this is going to redirect you to that next stream as soon as I hit the end button. Thank you guys for joining me. I really appreciate you. I really enjoy having some people to interact with while I watch this stuff, because this is a terrible, awful case to watch alone. So I will see some of you in an hour and a half, and I will see some of you tomorrow. Don't forget to hit the like button for me, because it helps me out a lot. And I will see you guys very soon. Okay. Bye.